Hello again, folks. This is Ronnie Turner from the Prophecy Freak YouTube channel. Coming to you once again with an update. We're going to start out with Jonathan Cahn on the Sid Roth Show. And he's giving us an update on the coming Jubilee, which we're actually in now. And also a couple of points on the holy vessels that have been desecrated in the United States, which I thought was really good. And he continues to feel that our perfect storm of the apostasy of our nation, turning away from God, eventually is going to cause a great shaking that he feels will lead to revival, which in a sense is a good thing, because I think that's what we need. That's what it's going to take to get our country's attention. So he's touching on that, and then also the continued polarization of the light from the dark, the good getting more obvious. We're going to have to shine for Jesus, whereas the dark continues to get darker. They're going to persecute and call us haters. So it's something that is going to continue to get worse, and I can see that happening as well. We're going to be persecuted for our beliefs and for standing up for what God's Word says. So I want you guys to check this out, and we'll let you see and see what you think.
Tell me about the seventh Shemitah.
Okay, this is the seventh Shemitah. Is this? It's not just a 7-year cycle. Every seventh Shemitah ushered in a super Shemitah, which is we call the Jubilee. The next seventh Shemitah is the year 2015, and the Shemitah, this period of the Jubilee, begins September 2015 to September 2016. Now, not dogmatic what God has to do, but if it follows the pattern, each time it means war in the Middle East, major war concerning Israel, and ending up with a major prophetic end-time restoration, beginning on Yom Kippur. That's when it starts. What it's taken as is the meaning release, but it actually means not only release, it means the fall, the shaking, or the collapse. It means to let fall. So that's, you see the double-edged sword right there. It can be a blessing or a judgment.
Okay, why is Wall Street coming up with the same patterns of 7 years that the Bible is coming up with, and they don't know the Bible?
That shows it. It's a witness because it's true, because it's happening. I started getting contact from people on Wall Street saying, we've seen this pattern. And their 7-year pattern is charted out by many Wall Street observers. Not only that, not just a 7-year pattern, but 7 years on the Shemitah, and they had no idea what it was. So now there's a whole stir in Wall Street saying, what is this Shemitah? What is this thing?
Now, you talk about a word, foreshadowings.
Yes.
What are the foreshadowings of the fall that we're seeing?
Well, here's the thing. The pattern of the Shemitah tends to be that it starts out mildly, and then if it's gonna manifest in this cycle, the last part is the dramatic part. That's when you head up to that Elul 29 wipeout time. So that is the dramatic part. And yet in the last one, 2007 and 8, there was actually foreshadows on the first day of the Shemitah and the beginning of the Shemitah of what would happen at the end, the collapse of the end. This Shemitah, very interesting what happened. First of all, at the end of September 2014, all of a sudden Wall Street started reeling violently for about a month. Nobody could explain it. It started the end of September. It started the week that the Shemitah began. Number two, another thing, one of the signs of judgment in the Bible is pestilence or plague. We had a scare last September, and it was that of Ebola. The day that the first signs of Ebola appeared in America was September 25th, and that September 25th is the opening day of the Shemitah. Another sign of judgment, which could be a coming judgment, is shaking or natural disaster, earthquakes in the Bible. Well, one of the things that happened last September is an earthquake struck America over 6 on the Richter scale. What day? September 25th, the same opening day of the Shemitah. All these things happened on the opening day. And not only that, there are signs, I've warned for a while, Sid, you know this because we've talked, that if America doesn't turn back to God, its crown as the head of nations will be removed.
Yeah, you said that on the show.
Absolutely, and we have not turned back. In fact, we've gone farther.
Wait, what do you mean by crown?
Well, the head of nations,
they dethroned.
Yeah, in every age there's a head of nations. Well, America has become the head of nations, but that is only by God. If we cannot drive God out of everything, we cannot defy Him and expect the blessings of God to continue. So one of the things that happened at the very opening part of the Shemitah, the first few weeks, 2 things happened. One is America's crown as the head, the #1 military nuclear power on earth, was removed. It passed to Russia at the very opening of the Shemitah. The next week, something else happened. America has been the strongest economic power on earth since 1871, when it surpassed the British Empire. That's the beginning of the American age. Well, that came to an end. As the Shemitah began, second week, America's crown as the strongest economic power was removed and passed to, you can guess, China. That was just the very beginning. Now remember, the Shemitah means the fall. One of the things about it is the Shemitah is not just about the rise and fall of economies, but the rise and fall of nations. America actually rose during a Shemitah, and could it fall linked to a Shemitah as well? So here is the rise and fall of civilization, and we're already watching that thing about China. That's the end of the American age. That's the beginning of the end.
When the leaders of ancient Israel turned away from God, when they abolished his precepts and broke his covenant, they did so in the shadow of Moses, whose voice cried out to them in warning. Mr. President, when you address the nation from this House, look up above the senators and the representatives, above the Supreme Court justices, and above the invited guest, and you'll see a face, the only full visage in that wall. Looking back at you, it is the face of Moses. And if that face could speak, it would say this: no man can overrule the laws of God, no order can annul the order of God, and no judgment of man can stand against the judgments of God. Invoke not his judgment, but choose life. Lead in the way of repentance. Invoke the grace of God that he might have mercy on this land. We've come to a most critical moment. Tonight, America stands at the crossroads. We will trust in the name of the Lord our God, in the name above all names, above all kings, above all powers. We will trust in the only name given by which we can be saved. We will trust in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords, the Judge of all judges, the light of the world, the glory of Israel, the foundation stone upon which this nation came into existence, and the only answer, the only chance, and the only hope that America has, that it might once again shine with the light of the fire of the presence of the glory of the living God and not go to hell. So help us God.
I'm excited. Jonathan, what is the significance of you being able, the privilege of speaking before these people?
Well, in the Bible, God always sends a word to the thrones and to powers. And I believe God warns before he judges. And so I believe God wants the word to go forth to the highest thrones of the land, just as he did again and again in the Bible. So he's opening these doors that I would never have imagined when we started here. That is to get the word to the thrones of America. To the one of the patterns of the Bible before judgment, one act often precedes that. That's the act of desecration. What happens is Ezekiel is taken into the temple of Jerusalem, shown idols and desecration of the temple, the holy place, and then he's shown the judgment that's coming. Daniel is in Babylon, and the king calls for the cups of Jerusalem, the temple of Jerusalem, the holy cups of God, to be taken out, partied with. They pour wine, they drink to the gods. They are desecrating God's holy vessels. Now, desecration is when you take something that's of God and you turn it against his purpose. Then the handwriting appears on the wall. This night is going to be judgment. Okay, so here's the act of desecration. Has there been an act of desecration linked to this? Well, there's another vessel of God that is just as holy as those vessels of the temple. That is the vessel of marriage. And here, something made by God, what America did is it struck down the biblical order of God, and what it did is take this holy vessel and turned it against its purpose. That's an act of desecration, number one. Then it was celebrated throughout the land with a sign of the rainbow. The rainbow doesn't belong to anything but God, anyone but God. The rainbow belongs to God. And the rainbow's a holy vessel. And so here you've got two desecrations. You're turning two holy things against the purposes of God.
They had like the rainbow at the White House.
Well, this is the last thing. You have a third desecration. You had, when this appeared, when this thing in Babylon appeared, it was the palace of the land. It represents the whole land. Well, the White House represents the entire land. What happens? The final act of desecration, the White House becomes an act of desecration. You have a triple desecration, Sid. And here's the rainbow, sign of God, linked to judgment and mercy, and it's being twisted. I mean, we could not do more in God's face than this. And this is the template of the harbinger, because what happens is that the nation, instead of coming back to God, becomes more defiant in God. And so we've got a dangerous convergence here. All these things are coming together, and America crossed that line. Things are not going to be the same. This is the key act of desecration that in the Bible precedes judgment.
Well, Jonathan says he calls it a perfect storm. Briefly, what is the ingredients that are going on?
Well, I don't know about you, Sid, I've never seen so many things converge at this time. On one hand, you have America's apostasy. On the other hand, you have the harbingers continuing, which are indication of a progression to judgment. On the other hand, you also have America and Israel. Here's the saving grace, that America was blessed because it blessed Israel. At the same time of turning away from God, it's turning away from Israel. Dangerous combination. The president has given, said that we're going to pass this treaty, which Israel says is putting us in danger, and all in the same period. You also have, by the way, the tower, this harbinger, the last of the harbingers is being completed this year. They just opened up the top. 2 days later, a storm came and struck that tower 3 times with lightning on top of it. We are watching everything converge, the Shemitah, blood moons, the super Shemitah, all these things. It's a dangerous period.
So that begs the question again.
Yeah.
I want to know, you're sanctified. I mean, God has raised you up. The way you explained all these things coming on you to be able to present this, it's all supernatural. I want to know your sanctified opinion as to what is next.
Okay, I believe a great shaking is coming to this nation and the world, but this nation. It will involve the financial realm, the economic realm, and will be a shaking even greater than that, and not just one shaking. I believe that, in the Bible, the way these things happen, judgment can come through natural disaster, through financial collapse, through man-made disaster like terrorism, all those things. And the thing is now, when people say the timing, I'm very cautious. I give the caveat. God doesn't have to do anything according to our schedule. But whether the shaking happens at this time or not, I believe we are entering a dangerous time when it could happen. And that is the time of the Shemitah, all these things coming, the Shemitah's wake in the autumn period. And we have also another dangerous period, which is 2015 to 16, according to all these things.
Wait, how come? You call this the wake of the Shemitah. Explain this.
Yeah, really, the high point, the climax of the Shemitah comes at the end, and that's when the wipeout comes, and that ushers in the next period that manifests all that. If you look at the greatest collapses in American history, the period is right after this, because it happens after Elul 29. So this whole autumn period, I believe we need to watch. Not that God has to do it, but we need to be ready. One of the reasons why I've given these teachings is that God's people be ready, that we be prepared. Wherever there's God, there's good news. Wherever there's God, there's hope. Now, here's the thing. God is always for redemption. I believe this. I believe the purpose of the shaking is not for Israel. The purpose of the shaking is to bring revival. Meaning, if there was no shaking, I believe there wouldn't be hope, because America's grown so deafened to God, it's going to take a shaking. Most of us came to the Lord because of a shaking. Same with nations. I believe that the shaking that's coming can, if we are ready and according to the sovereignty of God, can lead to the greatest revival we have ever seen, ever. End-time revival. And there can be judgment and revival at the same time.
Is there a strategy for us? Tell me.
Yeah, I would say, one of the things we talked about is the Elijah paradigm in the teachings, and that is that one is we have to be, more and more God's people have to be unplugged from the world now, more weaned from being dependent on the world when this happens. Number 2, we have to be more plugged into God, just like Elijah was, a man of God, man of prayer, man of power. We have to be bold, we have to be committed. There's this is the end times. And Sid, I believe in the end times, it's not just about things getting darker, but there's a polarization. The dark gets darker, but the lights have to get brighter. That's what God is calling us to do. We are to shine. This could be our greatest moment. If these are the days of Elijah, we must become the Elijahs of the day.
Jonathan, a final word.
Listen, people are saying, how do I be safe? Where should I be? Where should I go? Well, the safest place, let me say one Hebrew word. The word for safety in Hebrew is Yeshua. And Yeshua is Jesus. Outside of him, there's no safety. Inside of him, there's no fear. Don't fear. Just get your life in Yeshua, Jesus. If you're in him, get more in him, and you will not fear. You will stand, because the Lord will be your safety.
All right, the next clip we have Joel Richardson on prophecy in the news. And he's given us a pretty good rendering of the Palestinian agenda. Deception is what he's calling it. Basically what is being told about the Palestinians is not completely true. And just the whole agenda behind trying to get them their own country, their own capital. And America is falling in line with the world now. And basically he's seeing that as an attack on the Jews. But he's also talking about God's chosen path of redemption being Jesus Christ. The world should respect that, and yet they're not. So I thought that was really good as well. But one thing he touches on finally is the Muslim awakening and the faith and testimonies that are coming out of Iran. He points out Iran is the fastest growing Christian nation in the world. which I've heard that from others as well. And the amazing testimony they have of dreams and visions and direct insight from Jesus Christ, letting them know that he is the Messiah. And just amazing testimony coming from that country with examples of healings, miraculous healings. So I thought you guys would want to see that as well. So we'll let you take a look at that as well.
What's gaining a lot of steam today, which is called the BDS movement, Boycott, Divestment, Sanction.
Yep.
And this is a grassroots movement that began among the Palestinian activists. And so you say, okay, well, you know, Palestinian activists are opposed to Israel. But what we're actually seeing today is we're seeing many college students jumping on board this movement, and they think it's a justice movement. They think it's an issue of justice. We're even seeing many Christians, even mainstream denominations that are supporting this. And really what this is it is a racist, when you really go back and read the words of the founders of this movement, the philosophy behind it, it is racism. Because the bottom line is right now, if you say, let's give the Palestinians a state, look, God cares about the Palestinians as much as he cares about the Jews or anybody else. But when you have such a widespread, overwhelming majority of the people among the Palestinians, because they've embraced the Islamic anti-Semitism, the Islamic hatred of the Jewish people, they want to wipe the Jewish people out. So when if you say, we need to give them a state, it's not just about giving economic justice to this one or that one. It's about empowering a people, giving them the weapons and all of the resources to attempt to carry out a genocide against the Jewish people.
Exactly.
And it's not an issue of justice. It's an issue of hatred. And we need to warn the American church, the Western church, about what this thing really is. And again, it's, you know, as we see what the progressives call progress, we often see as decay. Decay of morality. Always. You know, on a local level here in the United States, whether it's abortion or gay marriage, or geopolitically with regard to the Palestinian narrative. And, you know, I don't want to indict one particular political party as being influenced by Satan, so to speak, but there is definitely a political wing that seems to be pushing a demonic agenda. And I know that's strong, inflammatory language, but when you look at the results, you look at the effects that it has on the lives of people, the wholesale slaughter of innocent little lambs in abortion, or the satanic desire to wipe out the Jewish people, that is demonic. And we need to be honest. And I'll tell you, Kevin, I speak in such a wide range of churches, and I come from a transracial family, and, you know, I've spoken in churches that are, you know, all African American, and so much of that community is pulled into this particular party. And you know, there's been a lot of promises made over the years and a lot of promises broken, but this is an issue. It's not, you know, it's not a black issue, it's not a white issue, it's a God issue, it's a Christian issue, it's a Bible issue, and we need to align our political views with truth, justice, and the ways of God. And I'm not saying that the Republican Party is always there either, but when you look at those that are standing with Israel, that are standing with the unborn, that are standing with the defenseless, that's the party that we want to align ourselves with. And, you know, and I'll say this too, as much as this is a theological work, what I really did is I tried to take all of these fairly complicated theological issues and simplify them so that any Christian can go through this as a Bible study together.
Exactly.
And that's something that was needed. And it's important that we do qualify that this is not an issue of saying God loves the Jews more.
No.
You know, in the same way that God says, for instance, you know, there's neither Jew or Gentile, male or female. Well, what he means is that we're all equal in the eyes of God.
Amen.
God loves us all, but God has special roles for different individuals. He has a different role for men and women, and he has a special role for the Jewish people. He called Abraham, he chose Israel. And it's like if, you know, you or I were to pass on and put one of our eldest children in charge of administrating the inheritance. You choose one of them to have that special role, but you love all your children equally. God has chosen the Jewish people to be the channel through which he would bless and redeem all of creation. And we need to acknowledge and stand in line with, in agreement with, God's particular choosing. And so with a high calling comes tremendous responsibility. And the Jewish people have paid for that calling that's rested on their lives down through history. They've been persecuted, you know, whether it be through the, you know, the Egyptian Empire or the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Christians down through history, a tremendous, long, painful history of abusing the Jewish people. I go through all of that. The Islamic world, and no matter where they go, they've been persecuted. And in that, we can see that Satan recognizes that God has a special calling on the Jewish people, and he's done everything he can to wipe them out. And we have all these people today that say God's done with Israel, he's no longer interested in Israel. Well, if God's done with Israel, Satan certainly hasn't received the memo, and he's still actively after them, and we need to acknowledge that. Well, you know, I mean, in the midst of all of the controversy and the rage and the anti-Semitism and the rise of radical Islam, God is about the business of saving people. And he's saving Muslims throughout the Middle East. And really, you know, I sometimes, and I'll just say this, I'm often speaking at these Bible prophecy conferences and, you know, Bible prophecy shows, and sometimes I say, you know, I kind of view myself as a missionary to the prophecy community, because so many of my friends that are into prophecy, we don't often get involved in evangelism and the gospel. And if all of our interpretations of these things aren't driving us back to share the gospel, doing it, and this is what's amazing is, you know, even among Muslims, throughout radical Muslims, I'm hearing stories and meeting people, meeting them that have come to faith. And when they come to faith, they make some of the most amazing believers. I just sat, Kevin, with a young gal who's from Iran. She was a radical Muslim when she was probably 11 or so. Her dad left her, moved to another city. Her and her mother were by themselves. At age 13, the mother got cancer. She was her mother's primary caretaker. They were dirt poor. At age 15, she used to go to these shrines and pray 8 hours a day to these imams.
Islamic shrines.
Yep, to the different imams, the Mehdi or Pastor Imam Reza. And 8 hours a day, her mother just kept getting worse. One day she's coming home, and someone told her about Jesus. Because, you know, the church in Iran is the fastest growing church in the world right now.
I have heard this.
20%, 19-point-something% per year. Someone told her about Jesus, and so she was all excited. She came home that day, and her mother was very deathly sick. And so she, you know, got caught up in that, distracted. At 12 o'clock, at 12 noon, her mother passed away. And this little girl, 15, 16 years old, shocked, she said, I didn't know what to do, and I just stood there for 6 hours, just frozen next to my mother's body. And at 6 o'clock at night, 6 hours later, she said, I remembered that someone had told me about Jesus earlier in that day. And she said, Jesus, you know, I didn't even have a chance to pray to you. And now my mother's gone, and it's too late, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Can you help me? And she prayed to Jesus for the first time. 6 hours after her mother died, her mother started coughing. And I know this is crazy. I sat with this girl. She woke up. She came up. They went to the hospital. They started running all these tests. They did all these tests. They couldn't find a lick of cancer in her body. This was almost a decade ago. Now this young girl, her mother, her best friend, all the cousins, all the aunts and uncles, everyone came to Christ. This young girl and her mother give themselves full time to sharing the gospel in Iran, one of the most restricted nations in the world. And I looked at her and I asked her, I said, now if you get caught, you know you're going to be tortured. You may be killed, raped, put in prison. And she just smiled and she said, suffering for Jesus is a basic part of what it means to be a Christian. And she said, I would be honored to suffer for him because I love him. And there was not a dry eye in the room. And I'm meeting former Muslims like this all over the place.
This is amazing, and God is really showing His hand in that nation from the reports I hear.
Yeah, and I'll even add to that, just to blow people's minds. The network that she's associated with, they have their theology down. They reject replacement theology. They're praying for Israel. They're standing with Israel.
Awesome.
They even worship to Hebrew worship songs.
Oh, now this has to be in a secret church.
Yes, it's very secret.
They're not doing this on a public corner in the country.
No, it's very, I mean, when they meet together, they whisper. I mean, it's very underground because they'll be tortured and put in prison, killed, and yet they're boldly and joyfully doing it anyway. And we in the West here, we can learn a lot from them.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you do you see the Jewish people in their nation, the secular people, what do you think their response is to all of this talk about two states? And
you know, Israel has as wide of a diversity of political opinion as anyone else. I will say this, though. When Christians start proclaiming the gospel to Jews, and they include that there's a Jewish man that's going to come back and reestablish the kingdom of Israel, that's a gospel that makes much more sense to the Jew that has been studying the scriptures to any degree. When we tell them, oh no, it's all just a spiritual, mystical reality, that the throne of David is just a metaphor, they don't get that. They go, that's a Greek worldview. When we preach to them the gospel that's proclaimed by the prophets, John the Baptist, Jesus, it's a gospel that they are much more open to receive. I would argue it's the biblical gospel. We need to get that.
Finally, on this update, we've got another clip from the Sid Roth Show. Cris Putnam and Tom Horn, they're talking about how science is matching the creation phenomenon. We see more and more of that every day, even how more of the Darwinian theory is being disproven with findings in current science investigation. So I thought that's really good. And they also touch on the orb phenomenon, which is getting more and more publicity, which is related to the UFO phenomenon as well, and their belief that these are the fallen angels that are in fact foretold in Revelation will become more manifest. So that's good information as well. And also touching on CERN and how that's today's Tower of Babel, and basically man's rebellion against God. And I can certainly see the similarities there. And then also touching on the Pope's ties to the end times, and how they have come out and stated that they're actually working the fact that aliens may exist into their doctrine. So that's all very interesting as well. And then finally, they're coming out with a prediction, which I don't think would be too hard for any of us to predict, that the Middle East is very soon going to use a weapon of mass destruction. You can see it coming with the events in Iran, with the nuclear deal that we've made, and then with Israel's stance that they will do whatever they have to protect themselves. I don't think that's far-fetched at all. I can see that coming in the next couple of years, that something is going to happen there. So the one thing I really liked about Tom Horn, he's coming out saying he believes there's going to be a worldwide revival, and I don't know if he's using the testimonies of the Iranians or not, but he sees a major awakening coming because of the shaking that's coming, which kind of matches up with what the Rabbi Cahn is talking about. So in that sense, I feel like that's kind of showing that it could be worth it. It could be a difficult stretch that we have to go through, but if that's what it takes to get the world back on track and recognizing Jesus Christ as Lord and God as the supreme creator, then I feel it's worth it. So in that sense, it's a little bit of a better news than we have been hearing. So the good news is the good side wins in the end. We all know that if we've read the book of Revelation, and we know God's plan. God wins in the end. We will win. So anyway, I wanted to let you see this update from Tom Horn and Cris Putnam.
Perfectly respectable idea within science now to believe in parallel worlds, parallel dimensions. It's not even really controversial. Most scientists just accept it.
Tell me what you caught on camera in Sedona, Arizona.
Well, we got video and photographs of what people call orbs, okay? Now, I initially was very skeptical about the whole orb phenomenon. I've seen, people thinking that these are ghosts and things like that on the internet.
I've seen photographs
Right.
of these little circles.
So the way we did it is we set up a still photograph with a flash, the way people normally catch orbs, but at the same time have a video camera running from a different angle. Now, if it shows up on two different angles,
Right.
In the same spot, it can't be a dust particle on the lens or any of those kind of things. We were kind of surprised that not only did we catch him on both cameras, but the professional photographer that I hired to come out there and video it saw it with his naked eye. He saw a ball of light flying toward him as he was filming. So not only did they show up on both cameras, and we literally saw them with our eyes.
Okay, Tom, what does the Bible have to say in the last days about portals and things like this?
You know, and this is the other thing, and I've studied prophecy a great deal of my life and never thought of it before, and I'm actually now saying that this is actually the most overlooked aspect of end times prophecy, the role that the windows of heaven and the gates of the earth will play in the end times. For instance, if you read the book of Revelation chapter 9, you see angels that are bound under the great river Euphrates, and a time comes when the gates or whatever's holding them there opens and they come up out of the earth. Very powerful. In fact, they wipe out 1/3 of rebellious humanity in the tribulation period. So we find out that the gateways of the earth is dynamic. It's a holding tank. Jesus tells story of the rich man and Lazarus going down into the belly of the earth, right? Jesus tells about Jonah, and he says, as he was in the belly of the earth, the Son of Man's going to go there too. Here's the good part, though. When Jesus in his death, burial, and resurrection went down into the belly of the earth, when he came out, it says he brought with him the keys to death, hell, and the grave.
That's right.
So not only are there gates, there's keys, and he's got the important large particle collider. Basically, it's in southeastern France. It's a 17-mile-long tunnel that's buried beneath the ground, and what they're doing there is they're accelerating protons at nearly the speed of light.
How many countries are involved?
Oh, 15, 20 countries of the earth, something like that.
And these are top scientists.
These are top scientists in the world. And actually, these are the most powerful scientific experiments that have ever been conducted on the face of the earth. They're accelerating these particles at just beneath the speed of light, and they film what's going on. Now, why are they doing all this? Well, particle physicists, of course, want to know about the nature of creation, so they burst these particles into their subatomic pieces to try to understand what they're doing. But they're also looking for gravitons because they believe that those gravitons might be escaping into a parallel reality. They not only believe it, Sergio Bertolucci, who is the science director at CERN, said it in a public interview. He said, we are going to open a doorway at CERN, and he said, we may send something through it, or something may come through it back to us. But they totally believe in it. And one other final thing, by the way, is they're also looking for gluon, and this thrills me as a theologian.
What is gluon?
Gluon is, in a layman's term, essentially the overlaying of sound waves, because particle physicists can't understand why we don't just fly apart, right? The actual matter that you're made out of, Sid, would disappear on the head of a pin. You're almost entirely motion. Protons, neutrons, spinning electrons, your movement. That's all you are. They don't understand.
There's no room for pride, is there?
Yeah, they don't understand why you don't fly apart. Well, what is gluon? Gluon is the overlaying of sound waves. It's what holds everything together. It's basically Genesis chapter 1, and God spoke, bara. God said, let there be. God emits sound waves, and he calls forth into somethingness, out of nothingness, atomic constructs, and he makes the plants, he makes the animals. We haven't had a pope in recent memory that has talked so much about the reality of the devil and talking about prophecy. He's more than twice highly recommended a book called The Lord of the World. This was written in the 1900s, and it's an apocalyptic vision of the end times that actually includes the role of the Pope and the Vatican and what role they will play in the rise of the Antichrist. He knows what all Jesuits know, that he is Pope number 112 in the prophecy of the popes, which is something that's been held in high esteem
so he
since
knows
forever.
That he's supposed to be assassinated?
My suspicion is that he may know that because, you know, the prophecy of the Pope says that Rome will be destroyed and all of that we talked about once before. And he has said publicly, he has said, I don't think I'm going to be around very long. It might only be 2 or 3 years. 2016 will be his 3rd year in office. He even recently said, I would be willing to be assassinated. I just hope it doesn't hurt. This guy is talking like a guy who understands that he is playing a role in prophecy. You know, the Pope is coming to the United States.
Yeah, next week.
Next week. He's speaking before the United Nations. He's speaking before a joint session of the U.S. Congress. This sounds like a page out of a Left Behind novel or something.
He's coming to the White House.
I've never before been willing to talk about this kind of stuff publicly because you need people that can believe, that operate in the supernatural, that understand the difference between fraud and real, and we don't have a whole lot around, so I've always just kind of stayed in my shell and shared it privately with people close to me. This time, we are preparing to make a prediction.
Do it right now.
It'll be the biggest one we've ever made before. Him and I are working on the 400 pages of it, but here it is in a nutshell, that the Islamic nation is going to use a weapon of mass destruction. This is all going to start happening within the next 48 months. But here's the thing. It's going to play out in ways people don't see.
Tell me.
In that when it happens, Pope Francis is going to call for the revitalization of the Christian rules for just war. That's a very important statement. It's part of deep theology. Well, it means that we can justify fighting a war if we can meet certain criterion that are outlined by both Catholic and evangelical theologians. You have to meet certain criterion. He's going to call for that, but the Islamic nation is going to see that as a fulfillment of their 450-year-old hadith, which says that at the end times they would go to war against the army of Rome. And people have thought,
Rome doesn't have a big army.
They're going to, because there's going to be a coalition army. It's going to be made up of the United States, United Nations, Britain, Muslim countries are going to come in, but they're going to see their Christian justification for this war through this call by the Pope, and that's why the Muslims are going to see this as a new crusade, the final crusade, a battle against the armies of Rome. However, in the same way that the end of World War II led to Zionism finally getting its legs under it, the United States, Britain, the United Nations started calling for a Jewish state, a Jewish nation, and in 1948, what happens? A miracle happens. The nation of Israel, the fig tree blossoms, right? And guess what happens? The church that was asleep at that moment, they saw prophecy unfolding before their very eyes, and it gave birth to what we today call the Age of Fire, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Your old friend Catherine Kuhlman, A.A. Allen, Billy Branham, tent revivals, tabernacle revivals. It gave birth to one of the greatest revivals in the history of humanity, and that is what I'm going to predict. A lot of my prophetic friends don't even believe me. They say the America's going down. I think we could, by the way, have an economic collapse. Some of that stuff could happen, but I don't see that the church is dead. What I see is that we are right now near the first fruits of the greatest revival in the history of humanity. Angelic manifestations, and the other part that you're going to love that I'm going to write about later is a revival among Jews that will turn messianic, large numbers of Jews. What you've always dreamed of and prayed of is going to happen in this revival.